It started with a shot that was never meant to exist. The camera was steady, the lighting perfect, the flags draped behind the podium, fluttering as if on cue. Every frame rehearsed a dozen times. Every cheer from the crowd synchronized like a national hymn. For the state, this was more than a broadcast. It was a declaration of absolute power, a portrait of control. But then, something slipped. A fraction of a second. A glimpse. And that was all it took. The cameraman didn't flinch when it happened. His fingers remained fixed on the focus ring. His posture never shifted. Years of working inside the heart of North Korea's propaganda engine had trained him well, trained him to obey, to erase what didn't fit, to capture only what glorified. But his mind froze. In the frame, the supreme leader, mid-sentence, suddenly faltered. His eyes, for a heartbeat, unfocused. His hand trembled as it clutched the edge of the podium. A quiet panic behind the mask. A human crack in a godlike image. It lasted less than a breath. But the camera had seen it. And so had he. He knew instantly this was not just a mistake. It was a forbidden truth. A flicker of vulnerability in a figure painted as immortal. Something that could never, under any circumstances, reach the editing room. Or worse, the public. He should have cut the feed. Should have erased the frame. But he didn't. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the smallest act of rebellion, buried deep beneath years of silence. Or maybe it was simply fear. Not of what he had seen, but of what would happen next. Because in North Korea, cameras are not tools. They are weapons. And on that day, the lens had turned on the regime itself. And now, the man behind it had become a target. His name was Kang Min-jae. But to the state he was just Camera Unit 4B. Born in a crumbling apartment block on the outskirts of Chongjin, Min-jae was the second son of a railway technician and a mother who worked at a garment factory. From the age of 7, he learned how to move without being seen, how to listen without reacting, and most importantly, how to keep his face blank. No matter what he heard, he had always loved light. As a boy, he would fix broken flashlights with scrap batteries, fascinated by how shadows danced across the concrete walls. His father once told him, in a rare moment of tenderness, "The world only gives light to those who know where to point it." That sentence stuck with him like an infection. At 15, his aptitude for optics caught the attention of a visiting production officer from Korean Central Television. It wasn't a scholarship. It was a summons. He was taken to Pyongyang, to the state-run College of Cinematic Propaganda, where boys didn't learn film, they learned control. Framing, editing, manipulation. The curriculum taught not how to tell the truth, but how to remove it. He excelled. By 22, Min-jae was handpicked to join the Supreme Leader's traveling broadcast team, an elite unit responsible for filming parades, ribbon cuttings, and visits to farms that never produced food. He wore a gray uniform with no insignia, carried a camera worth more than his family's apartment, and knew how to capture a smile that wasn't real. His days were filled with technical perfection, angles, lighting ratios, controlled movements. His nights were a different kind of silence, eating alone in dormitories, writing coded journal entries on scrap paper he would later burn. He wasn't allowed a phone. He wasn't allowed to speak freely, even to other crew members. But the camera was his only voice, and he had learned how to use it well. The crew was never told where they were going until minutes before departure. Sometimes it was a school inspection, other times a military weapons showcase. Everything was staged, the lighting planned down to the second, and always the order was the same. Show strength. Show perfection. Show nothing else. Until the day the leader faltered. Before the mistake, Min-jae lived in silence, but not in fear. His days were predictable, almost ritualistic. Wake at 5:30 a.m. sharp. Dress in the assigned uniform. Eat a government-issued breakfast in the crew cafeteria, cold noodles, watery soup. One boiled egg. By 6:15, he was at the equipment depot, checking tripods, testing focus rings, reformatting memory cards under the fluorescent lights. Everything had to be exact. Dust was forbidden. Scratches were dangerous. A single corrupted frame could be misinterpreted as sabotage. The crew didn't speak much. They weren't encouraged to. Every camera operator was a quiet island, assigned to different angles during a shoot. Each of them briefed separately to prevent cross-comparison. Even eye contact during filming was discouraged. Mistakes weren't corrected, they were recorded. And those records went somewhere no one ever asked about. Min Jae had learned long ago that perfection was his only protection. Still, there were cracks. Little moments. Whispers. Once, after a long shoot at a chemical factory, he returned to the dormitory to find that his roommate, Jin-soo, a focus technician, had been reassigned. No warning. No goodbye. Just gone. His belongings erased, his bunk remade. When Min Jae asked, the only response he got was, he made a framing error. Another time, while editing B-roll footage from a rural visit, he had accidentally left in a wide shot where a soldier had momentarily slumped from heat exhaustion. The next morning, a supervisor entered his room at 3 a.m., took the hard drive, and left without a word. Nothing happened to Min Jae directly, but for weeks after, he wasn't assigned to primary angles. It was a silent punishment. He understood. Still, he stayed loyal. Not because he believed, but because he didn't know anything else. There was a certain numbness that came with the job. Filming joy where none existed. Capturing pride on faces that only held hunger. He knew what they were doing. He knew the lies. But detachment became survival. The lens offered distance. If he could keep the world on the other side of the glass, it couldn't touch him. At least, that's what he thought. But one evening, something shifted. He had just finished uploading footage of the leader touring a children's hospital. A place freshly painted, stocked with imported medical beds. Doctors in bright coats, all arranged just for the camera. As he reviewed the shots, his eye caught something strange. In the reflection of a window, a nurse was shaking her head violently, mouthing something. He froze the frame. Zoomed in. Her lips said, "This is not real." It shook him. He deleted the file. Of course he did. But he couldn't delete what he saw. It haunted him that night. It wasn't just the nurse's words. It was the fact that someone else had noticed. Someone else had seen through it. And for the first time, he felt less alone. That small, silent rebellion, just a look, just a whisper, lodged itself in him like a splinter. He began watching more closely. And that was what made him dangerous. It was supposed to be another routine shoot. The leader was scheduled to give a televised address, commemorating the 70th anniversary of the National Army. The event was held inside the newly refurbished Victory Hall, a vast marble chamber lined with golden busts and crimson banners. Everything had been prepared with the usual choreography. The crowd was pre-selected, the applause rehearsed, the speech vetted by the propaganda ministry. Min Jae's position was critical that day. Center camera, mid-distance, the angle reserved for the leader's most iconic frames. His orders were simple. Steady shot, no pans, no zooms unless authorized. As always, the stream was live-fed to internal monitors for the elite and simultaneously recorded for later broadcast to the public, edited, cleaned, mythologized. The speech began as expected. Strong tone, bold gestures. Then, something shifted. In the middle of a sentence, the leader coughed once, then again. His face tightened. He placed a hand on the podium to steady himself. For a split second, his expression contorted not in strength, but in pain. His left eye drooped. His hand trembled. Min Jae instinctively adjusted the focus, trying to compensate. And then, the leader stumbled. It was barely noticeable. But the podium jerked. He caught himself, tried to recover, continued speaking, but the rhythm was broken. The audience did not react. They couldn't. Their expressions were fixed, like masks. But Min Jae had filmed everything. His finger hesitated near the mark for edit button. But he didn't press it. He didn't cut. He didn't blur. He didn't avert. His camera stayed locked in, and that was the mistake. When the speech ended, Min Jae knew the protocol. He followed the crew backstage, submitted his drive to the data handler, and returned to the dormitory. But something was off. No one spoke on the ride back. His supervisor didn't meet his eyes. And when Min Jae entered his room, he found his backup camera missing. He checked the drawer under his bed empty. His old memory cards gone. His crew pass deactivated. His door unlocked from the outside. Panic surged in his chest. He was being erased. And then came the knock. Quiet. Almost polite. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He grabbed the only thing that still worked, his personal hard drive, hidden beneath a floorboard, and ran. No plan. No destination. Just flight. Down the back stairs. Through the service hallway. Past the trash incinerator. Out into the alley behind the media compound. His escape had begun. And this time, there would be no cuts. No edits. No second takes. This was real. The cold hit him first. Pyongyang in late autumn wasn't yet deep winter, but the night air was sharp, dry, and smelled faintly of burning coal. Min Jae had no coat, no money, just a portable hard drive pressed against his ribs under his shirt, and a growing certainty that he was already being hunted. He moved like a shadow, taking alleys instead of streets, ducking beneath surveillance poles, mimicking the body language of workers on a night shift. Years of observing from behind the lens had taught him how people moved when they didn't want attention. Now, he used that knowledge to disappear. His first goal was to reach a train. Not the central station, it was too monitored. Instead, he crept toward a freight yard he remembered filming months earlier, where cargo trains moved north toward the Chinese border. It took him 10 hours to cross the city on foot. He drank from cracked water pipes, avoided checkpoints by crawling under fences, and once spent 3 full hours pressed between 2 garbage bins as patrols passed. At dawn, he found the train. It was slow, rusted, loud enough to mask his movements. He waited for a distraction, a dropped crate, a barking officer, and slipped into an empty container. Inside was frozen fish. He curled beside the boxes, teeth chattering, lungs burning with every breath. He didn't sleep. Not really. The train took 2 days to reach Horyong. Once there, the real danger began. The border was only kilometers away, but it was the most fortified stretch of land in the country. Guard towers, electric fences, tripwires, watchdogs trained to tear, and worse, informants. Locals were paid in extra rations or soap for reporting suspicious movement. He couldn't trust anyone. Even children could be spies. He stayed hidden in the outskirts of a farming village, living in a half-collapsed shed, eating raw rice he found in a broken silo. He didn't speak, didn't light fires. He memorized patrol patterns, counted dogs, waited for fog. On the 6th night, it came. The mist was thick and cold and smelled like earth. He moved beneath it, belly to the ground, dragging himself between bushes, through ditches, until he reached the river. Tumen. It wasn't wide, but it was fast. He stripped down to his underclothes, wrapped the hard drive in a plastic bag, and taped it to his chest. Then he slipped into the water. The cold was a knife. His muscles seized. His breath vanished. But he pushed forward, arms barely working, the current tugging at him like a hand trying to drag him back. His foot hit a rock, then another. And suddenly he was across China. He crawled up the muddy bank, skin purple, lips blue, and passed out under the roots of a birch tree. He should have died. But someone found him. She was old, wrinkled, her eyes narrow and unreadable. A farmer's widow living alone, not far from the river. She nursed him with broth, gave him dry clothes, and didn't ask questions. Only after 3 days did she speak. "You're not the first," she said, "but you're the only one who still smells like film." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He didn't trust his voice anymore. After a week, she put him on a truck bound for Shenyang. The driver was mute, or pretending to be. It didn't matter. Min-jae sat in the back with crates of vegetables and the lingering fear that every turn would end in arrest. But it didn't. In Shenyang, he met a man who knew a man. Another network. Another risk. But this one had done it before, smuggling defectors across provinces, into embassies, into hiding. They gave Min-jae a new name, a new jacket, a burner phone, but not safety. That would take longer. Seoul was nothing like he imagined. He had seen it once, in smuggled footage, pixelated and stuttering on an illegal flash drive. Neon signs, cars that glided silently, people walking fast, talking faster, their eyes full of something he had never known. Choice. But now, standing in the middle of Gangnam Station, shoulder to shoulder with strangers rushing past him, Kang Min-jae felt more exposed than ever. He was given a studio apartment, a therapist, a stipend from the government's defector integration program. They told him he was free now, that he could walk where he wanted, say what he thought, film what he saw. But how do you live freely when your entire existence was built on watching, not participating? The walls of his apartment were too white, too clean. The silence inside it was different. It wasn't controlled. It was empty. He tried to film again. He bought a camera with part of his stipend. Not a broadcast machine, just a handheld mirrorless lens. He took it out to the Han River, filmed the lights reflecting on the water, the couples laughing, the children running. The footage was beautiful, but it felt hollow. One night, he went to a cinema. He had never been inside one. The room went dark, and images bloomed across the screen, stories told without fear. There was a scene in the film where a character failed, publicly, and instead of punishment, others helped him stand. Min-jae cried. He didn't understand the dialogue, but he understood the freedom. That night, he uploaded the footage from his escape. The hard drive had survived. He had kept it hidden even from the network that smuggled him in. The clip of the leader's stumble, the hand tremor, the nurse's whispered truth. It was all there. He didn't release it. Not yet. But he watched it again and again, studying not the leader, but himself, the way his lens had frozen truth instead of fear. The therapist told him, "You can't build a future if you keep filming your past." But Min-jae knew something different. He hadn't escaped just to survive. He had escaped to show the world what they were never meant to see. Months passed. The world outside barely noticed. But inside his small apartment in Seoul, a man who had once been the lens of a dictatorship was learning to see again, not as a technician, not as a servant of power, but as a human being. Kang Min-jae began documenting things no one ordered him to. A grandmother selling rice cakes on the street. A boy practicing skateboard tricks in a parking lot. A janitor humming old trot songs while cleaning a subway floor. Each shot was quiet, gentle, unremarkable. But to him, they were sacred. He started uploading clips anonymously. Not the footage of the leader that still sat untouched, like a live wire, but fragments of life, raw and real. There was no voiceover, no music, just light and movement and truth. People began to notice. A few dozen subscribers turned into hundreds, then thousands. They called it the lens that escaped. He never showed his face. He still didn't sleep well. The shadows in his dreams wore gray uniforms. Sometimes he'd wake in a cold sweat, convinced a knock at the door would be the last thing he'd hear. But dawn always came, and with it, a choice, to hide or to keep filming. And then, one morning, He uploaded it. The clip. The leader's stumble. The tremble. The break in the mask. No caption. No explanation. Just truth. It went viral in hours. Some called it fake. Others said it was old, irrelevant. But among the flood of comments, one stood out, a simple sentence, written in Korean. I worked in that hospital. The nurse. She disappeared after that day. Min Jae closed his laptop and wept. Not because of guilt. Not because of fear. But because, for the first time in his life, someone had seen what he saw and believed him. His story wasn't over. It never would be. But now, the silence he had lived in for so long was broken, and in its place was a voice. One that couldn't be edited. One that couldn't be deleted. One that, finally, belonged to him.